My name is Paul. I'm the head of the School of Agriculture and Environment at Massey University. So welcome here today to the annual Riverside Open Day. I just want to acknowledge a couple of people. We've got Jill and Tony here from the Trust, who are the owners, for use of a better word, of the property that the university is lucky enough to lease off the Trust. We're very grateful for that relationship. The farm here, and I'll invite Digby up in a moment to quickly summarise the farm and just to outline his management policies and what's on the farm before we go into the activities focused around the long-term trial with the Wiltshire grading up study. And you can ask questions as we go through. Please feel free to do that. Because it's important that you fully understand what's going on and ask us those questions, because the Wiltshire study in particular is a long-term study, and so we have the ability to add more research to that study as we go. I'd also like to introduce Andrew Kirk, who's at the back there. He's just arrived at Massey from Palmu, and here's our new director of our farms at Massey. I thought I'd just quickly also just give a quick overview on how Massey is going in terms of agriculture. People like to ask that question. So the Agriculture and Environment School, or the old Ag School, Ag faculty, as many of you might have known it as in the past, is now 98 years of age. In 2 years' time will be the university's centenary from when it was a college. So therefore the Ag School is, as we call it, the oldest part of the university. In terms of research activity, what's going on, even though the university now has 30,000 individual students, if you count an individual student doing at least one course across its 3 campuses, it's very large, because we have the Manawatu, the Palmy campus, the Wellington campus and the Auckland campus. There's 30,000 students across those campuses. The vast majority, 65% of those students across those campuses are studying part-time by distance, so while they're working. The agricultural schools, therefore, and many of us think as the heart of the university, is actually a very small part of the university now, as a percentage. However, having said that, the agricultural school, which only has about 60 staff, academic staff or researchers, has over 50% of the university's research in terms of research contracts, research activities. The agricultural school has about 140 PhD students at the moment, and we've got 160 master's students. So there's a lot of research. You might not think there's a lot of research in agriculture and horticulture, environmental science and animal production, etc. going on, but there's a lot. We've got a lot going on, probably more than ever before. And maybe we're just not as good as we have been in the past at letting people know that. In terms of our undergraduate programs, the undergraduate programs are always evolving, because they have to evolve to meet the needs of industry and today's learners and future students. So the agricultural school has the traditional agricultural science, agribusiness, horticultural science. We have the Bachelor of Earth and Environmental Science, and we also have animal science as well, animal production. Across those programs, our annual intake of first year students, and it's very hard to count the students in terms of on a full-time equivalent, but it's about 270 to 300 full-time equivalent students, but 40% of our students now are studying part-time. So there's more than that in first year, because they might be doing 2, 3 or 4 or 5 courses. You could do 8 in a year, because tertiary education is now very expensive in terms of costs you about $8,000 to $9,000 a year in fees, plus your living costs, etc. So if you think about the agriculture, horticulture programs, and people who are training to be in the primary industries are probably in the regions, and there's a lot of jobs in the regions in the agriculture, horticulture space, so many of our students now are choosing to do their degrees over, instead of 3 years, 4, 5 or 6 years. If you're doing horticulture, it makes sense to start at the Bay of Plenty, work in the kiwi fruit industry and do your study around that, and just come down for block courses. So our students are different than they have been in the past in terms of that mix of students. But we've still got very good numbers, and already our enrolments for next year, so first year intake, so the first year students starting on last week of February, already enrolments are bigger than the numbers we had on the last week of February first week of March last year. So there's certainly a demand out there, which, you know, that's not surprising the way the economy's going with the primary industries, that people are seeing studying in agriculture or horticulture or the related disciplines is a good career. So the ag school's in a very good place. We've got a lot on. And so the projects we're talking about today are just a small part of that, about what's going on. And then Digby, you just want to come up and quickly summarise the property, the size of the property, basically the system you run, because people are always interested in that, before we...
Can I sit down and be a bit more casual?
I thought I was pretty casual.
Thanks for the opportunity. Oh, I love speaking in front of everybody. For some reason I developed a stutter, which is a bit of a bugger because I'm always up here for twice as long. But just an overview, we're about roughly 700 hectares, which includes 80 hectares up the road, about 6 k's up the road. Straight breeding ewe flock. The Wiltshire trial is separate from the commercial ewes, very separate. So yeah, everything's very separate there. We don't have beef cows, we have steers, buy them weaners and finish them. So it's quite a simple system. The farm's broken up into sort of different areas really. We've got the stony flats on this side of the Waipua. Other side we've got silt flats, and then we've got clay hills. Rainfall's pretty good, around the 11 or 1200. Up the road, the other block, it's quite a bit more, so it's quite a good block up there. But we're running about 5,500 stock units of sheep and beef, and then probably another 5,500 stock units of priner, grass growth. We're not making too much money out of those ones. Bit of a problem for us, so they're a bit of an issue for us here. The nor'wester wind is our prevailing wind. Really hammers the place, so we have the moisture, but we get hammered with the wind, so a bit of an issue. As far as performance, the ewes most of the ewes are sitting around 150 to 160% lambing most years. Pretty consistent. A little bit of a change this year. We've cut our numbers back a little bit to give ourselves a bit more breathing space. I think we probably had too many lambs on the farm, and it's causing a few issues with the dredge thing, and sort of addressing that. But yeah, other than that, I've got a bit of a family involved. Grace, one of my daughters, works here as well. She's really good. She's IT. She can do anything, fix your TV, anything. And my wife Robin, she always helps in the yards too. So I'm quite lucky with that. So quite spoiled. Yeah. So I hope you have a good day. And any questions? Yeah, feel free to ask Paul. Thank you.
And the sheep will be out the back?
Yeah. So there'll be some mixed age and tudors run together with lambs and foot. We haven't dagged anything. You know, you want to see them as out. And there's also some hoggets with lambs at foot. You'll see that in both mobs we run romneys parallel with the Wiltshires. We run under the same conditions, same thing. So there's a comparison.
And so out there'll be some halves and 3/4, 7.
Yeah.
7/8 and 15, 16.
Yeah. You won't have them drafted off.
No, but they'll be there in the mix. Yeah.
So I mean, there's quite a variation with some of the wool, obviously. Probably my biggest bugbear with the Wiltshires is the amount of wool you get around your paddocks.
The birds like it.
The birds like it.
It's good for their nests.
So it's just a visual thing as far as I can see. But then I'm shear. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Digby. So first, Nick Snedden, who's now leading the project. Steve Morris, who's down the front there, as many of you have been here for the last 3 or 4 years, was leading the project. Steve's decided to retire, but he's still very much involved with the project. But Nick is now the day-to-day lead on the project, so he's going to give the first summary up front. So thanks, Nick.
I'll see if I can turn this on without making this probably change the channel.
And remember, as Nick's going through the slides, if you've got any questions, ask them. You've got plenty of time. Okay? Don't think
Yeah, it's much easier for me to just tell you something then than have to remember where I was in slides and go back there. So I was fortunate enough to come back to university to teach and do research in 2022, so the project was 2 years underway when I came back, being led by Steve and Paul and Hugh. I was initially brought in for helping on the genetics side, come through and helping out with day-to-day running of it as well. So it's been quite a journey. I'll sort of start with finding out whether my clicker works. So the whole reason this started was looking at the price of wool. So up here on the screen, got a graph that was quite fortunately made by one of our new PhD students. The green line shows you what the wool price would be if you adjust it for inflation. The dark line on the bottom is what the price actually was when it was being paid. So you can see prices have been coming up since the project started back in 2020. Down here we hit $1.90 a kilogram of wool. It's come up, but if we go back to 2010 and it was $6, to turn that into now price, you're getting almost $9 a kilo. So it gives you an idea of where the price of wool has to get back to start to make a return that was being made on that. And this is all based on coarse wool, not the really nice making clothing, merino wool, making some relatively okay sock, mid-micron stuff. But you can see that wool prices have recovered, but they're certainly a long way from where we'd want them to be if you're going to stick with woolly sheep that are essentially there to produce meat.
Yeah, it's an interesting graph, and I've looked at that graph for many years, many decades, over the years, and always wondered where it ends up. I've changed it slightly so that I have the net wool price less shearing costs, and it's actually a negative, it goes into a negative, doesn't it?
Yep.
People know that because it's been negative for the last few years on their balance sheet. So I think it's probably quite an important piece to add, because it's not only the price of wool, it's also the cost of shearing that makes a difference.
Yeah, if we put the price of shearing on that graph, the price of shearing is just one direction only, so this becomes the difference between the two. It's more just to show that, you know, if you think $6 is where it needs to get back to, it's not. It has to get north of 8 to actually be the same as it was when it was 6. So if we have a look at going back to the 1990s for how much income was being made on farms, you can see it was almost, most of the time it was even split, or actually slightly more towards wool than meat on farms. You go through to mid-2010s and you go up to almost no income from wool, and it's all coming from meat. And then last year's, start of this year's income, the price for wool has gone down even more. The price from sheep has actually come down as well, because some of that's coming from the pivot to having beef animals in the operation as well. So shifting to having more beef animals in. But again, that's not showing where wool's going to be valuable for the farmer running a meat producing system. Even on high country, you know, you've gone from 70% income from wool to 40% of the income is coming from wool. Meat has gone up on hill country stuff, so that is where you had fine wool, the wool was valuable, and even there it's being replaced by just producing meat. So one of the aspects of this is how we actually handle and deal with wool hasn't changed since we started dealing with it. Okay? It's always been stuck in bales, stuck on trucks, people shearing either with hand shears, and nothing else has happened with it. It just gets taken off a sheep and it gets sent. We have very few scourers left in the country. We don't really do a lot of processing of wool in New Zealand. Most of it gets exported for all of that purpose. Might come back as carpet or insulation most of the time. But we haven't changed how we're dealing with this product we're making. So there's also another piece of research that has to be done somewhere in the industry of how do you shift the value chain of onshore wool production and wool handling. That's a much bigger mountain to climb than working out how to breed sheep that don't need shearing. So it's a good reason to stay with going with shedding sheep. So some bioeconomic modelling was done at the start. We now have a PhD student who's going and revisiting the same data and testing the assumptions and seeing whether they still hold true and whether they're making a difference. So when the project was started, it was forecast to take somewhere between 12 to 15 years to transition the entire flock. Because you can do one cross and you get half, but now you've got 1 year of halves, and the rest of your flock are all the woolly sheep you had before. You cross again, so you have to keep crossing and culling and crossing and culling. So before you replace your entire flock, it's going to take time to do this. Now, that's just taking it and doing no DNA testing, you're just culling based on phenotype, and that means that your high shedding sheep that you may have, you may cross it and get a lower shedding lamb out of it. So it's just taking those incremental changes and replacing your whole flock. If your sheep lives for 5 years, your first cross sheep are still there in year 6. So year 6 you start losing your halves, year 8 you're losing your 3/4, so on and so forth. So by full we are going to 15/16. I don't think many people are going to argue over 3.25% for genetic influence. So that's when you get to 1/32. So when that research was done, basically the net present value was about 7%. So you're making 7% more by not having to shear your sheep than having to shear your sheep at the start. And then the break even at that time was $4.15. Given the change in price of shearing and other management practices associated with having wool, that price will most likely have changed. And what we're going through the process at the moment is working out what that new break-even price for wool is. So that was the price that I could get for clean mid-micron, about $3.50. So all this came back to we were limited by the information we had. We didn't know what the production levels would be at those different levels of crossing. So there's a fantastic thing in genetics, it's called hybrid vigor or heterosis, and that is you do a cross and the animals are going to perform better than either or the average of either of the parents. So you get this benefit from doing a crossbreeding trial. But when you do the second cross, you lose half of that benefit. And you keep losing half of the benefit each time you back cross. So you have to get to having a 15/16 before you can start to evaluate the true difference between the animals you're going for and the animals you started with. Because your first year of project, these things are incredibly fertile. They're growing like mad. They've got a lot less wool. But what's happened is that's all the heterosis effects coming through and making them grow faster, produce more milk, be more fecund. And then as you start to cross back to the other breed, you lose that hybrid vigor effect, and they reduce down towards the parent that they're being crossed to's mean for reproduction, and they move closer to that one's mean or average for growth rate. So that's the process of doing this long-term study. Because if we just went out and told you the study's results from the first year, go for it. People finish that crossbreeding process and get to a new stable breed, it's not going to look like it did in the first year. What is happening with our sheep as they age? So that's looking at feet and teeth, having a look at their reproductive rates over time. Are we getting more empties, less empties? Do we get DAG, increase in DAG scores as they get older? Do we have to do more fly strike treatments? What's our culling rate looking like? What's our attrition rate out of the flock looking like as we age these sheep? What are the costs that you're incurring? Because you can go, okay, here's the cost of my normal sheep, and here's my cost in the first cross, and just following them through, because I'm pretty sure most shearers will charge you to shear a full sheep because you've only got to do half the job. I know I would, because I don't like shearing sheep, but it's still going to cost you just as much to shear them. And then, what are our proportions shedding? And that's where we start to look at the genetics and what genes are involved. Looking at animal welfare and impacts, and then we've done a couple of years, we were sent the hides to the Leather Research Centre in Palmy to have a look at what those hides look like and look at skin thickness. Right, so this is the process over time. So starting back in 2020, we did the first cross, 2021, we have our first cross are born and we can start to breed them. So at that point, we cross them all back to Wiltshire again. So every time the Wiltshires are mated, they are mated back to a Wiltshire, and we have a cohort of Romney that are running with them that are mated to Romney rams. So we have purebred Romneys being compared to our increasing proportions of Wiltshire. That means that each time a new crop is born, they have a greater proportion of Wiltshire in them. So 2022, we've got 3/4 Wiltshires. 2023, we got 7/8. Last year, our 15/16 were born. And then this year, our 15/16 hoggets, which were born last year, have given birth to what would essentially be referred to as a full blood or 31-30 seconds. But it takes too long to say that, so it's called full. So that means that we've got full blood ones born now, and we can now follow those from now through until 2027 to see what they look like as two-tooths. That at least gives us to two-tooth stage of these animals.
But how are you, what are you using for mating your 15/16s to maintain the 15/16 status?
So they get
Are
mated.
you getting some special rams bred by a ram breeder or what?
So we're using the same rams we've been using, or same ram breeder the whole time. Not the same rams, otherwise they'd have a much worse consideration. But using the same breeder, getting full Wiltshire rams and putting those
That's
on.
Richard, but what are you doing with the rams to maintain the 15/16?
No, we're not.
No, we're not. So
Only the ewe progeny are kept. The 15/16 ewe hogget lambs are kept, and then those lambs go against another Wiltshire. They're bred to a full Wiltshire, so we're getting more and more. Yeah, we're going right up to a greater percentage of Wiltshire all the time. So the male lambs just go they go out of the study and big beef. Some go into the meat quality work, but the rest just go back to big beef.
So 15/16 actually isn't the ultimate.
No, 15/16 in some breed societies is enough.
yep.
But
It's mainly it gets fiddly to deal with. So after that's 31-30 seconds, after that's 63/64ths, after that is 127/128ths. So if you want to keep tracking it, you get to very tiny proportions of the genetics of an animal.
Question about a commercial fence.
Yep.
It's often when you're going up to an first cross and contact with someone to use that particular size, you have any romneys to speed up that process.
so what's your question?
So you basically contact with someone to use the Wiltshire and reduce your placement, reduce flock, so you don't get those romneys for those 5 years. That will speed up the process. And
So
that hybrid figure out animals generally, the males.
and
About commercial sector.
you could do that, but Mick will also talk about where one of the students is here is going to look for the DNA, for the genes as well, so you can use a marker as well, not just. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, so there would be a market for them as a terminal sire. Because you have a sire who may have less wool on him, and may not need to belly crutch or crutch him before doing anything with it. He'll still grow most of the fleece.
Sorry, you might be about to cover this, but when you were selecting rams, has that changed over the course of the study? Were you initially just selecting for shedding and then moving on to selecting for meat quality traits and that sort of thing?
No, so pretty much we just go, Richard, have you got some rams? And then he gives us his best ones.
There's no real directive on, in answering that question, there's no real directive on that. I guess, Wiltshire, so just as a comment from the breeder, it is interesting that the whole landscape of shedding sheep has changed from the start of this project, and now there's a hell of a lot more around. As a breeder too, the landscape's changed a lot. There's a lot more breeders. And also the Wiltshire sheep are a lot better connected into the rest of sheep breeds, via sim or as well. So you sort of think the Wiltshire population has gone like that, but actually Wiltshire genetics has gone like that too. So interestingly, so I think we're on to the 6th battery of rams, is that right?
Yeah.
The first lot, because it was a first cross, they were actually really good rams, but they were probably a slightly woollier end of Wiltshire. at the time, I suppose the shedding had only just started to look for the Gs too, so that was all sort of unknown back then. Since then, probably the second and third battery of rams were lower performance but better shedding to try and speed that up a little bit, and then the last 2 years they were probably quite, it's ranged between sort of reserved size of mine that we've needed, or as sort of two as I can do. So yeah, there's nothing real scientific, but that's from an anecdotal point of view, I guess.
Yeah. And the other side of that, it works quite well for the trial, because we're saying what would be available if someone went out and brought rams. So you're not going to go around every possible breeder and get the 100% shedding ram from every breeder you can get. You're going to go to one farm and get a selection of animals from there and bring them in.
And the important point to bring back when Nick talks later is, as Richard said, there is variation in shedding within Wiltshires too. Right? Because remember, the Wiltshire is really it was a Wiltshire horn originally, and we didn't want the horns in Australia, so they crossed with the Pole Dorset to get rid of the horn. So there is variation.
I guess to sum it up, the moving towards a shedding has been left as an average, whereas if you were a commercial farmer trying to do it and that was your key thing, you could actually select from like those ones, or if you wanted to select the growth rate more, you could push into whatever direction that you want a lot faster.
Yeah, so breeding outcomes, basically since 2021 to now, we have not seen any difference in timing of estrus or difference in live weights between the ewes and our ewe lambs and our mixed age, and there's been no difference in the fertility on the animals. Now, some of that comes from small animal groupings where we might only have 20 animals in a group, which makes it a bit harder to try and determine whether that's a true difference. It may look like one on paper, but it all overlaps when you start to break it down into statistics.
That's right, and we slowly build up our cohorts every year. So this year's 15/16 is a small population, but we'll get more 15/16 next year and the year after. So our numbers get bigger and bigger over time. So because we go through the change, so we get more confidence in the data of the various crosses over time with a few year cohorts.
So case in point, this is our scanning percentages from our romneys and our Wiltshire cross animals as hoggets and two tooths, and then they become 4s and 6s and 4s down the bottom there. But you can see the hoggets, our romneys sitting out between 1.1 and 1.2 lambs at scanning, and our our Wiltshire cross ones are comparable. So the years that are really good for the romneys are just as good for the Wiltshire cross. We're not seeing anything super jump out. We do have what we think is a bit of heterosis effect happening down in the two-tooth and adult ewe scores, where we are seeing a lift, but that lift happens in the first cross and it's a smaller lift in the second and the third. So as we've reduced hybrid vigour, our sort of lambing and scanning percentages have come back. But to have a highly fecund Romney flock to compare them to adds a little bit to it. So we're scanning in between 1.8 and 2.1 lambs per ewe from the Romneys that are running with these animals.
Probably not statistically significant, but it appears that those 7/8 and 15/16 pilot scans are they a bit more moderate than the...
Coming down a bit, so this 1.8 comes from 8 animals. So there's not really enough in there to determine what's causing that. And you can see it was 1.5 for the three quarters, so I think there's a bit of heterosis coming through in there, and it's been lost in the next generation.
Yeah, but
and they're also hobbit.
They're hoggets out of hoggets.
Hobbits out of hobbits.
Yeah, and as we get 2 or 3 more years of that, instead of being 8, there'll be 50 of them in a couple of years, so we have more confidence. Right, there's now 50 or more of the halves.
So looking at the 2 deaths again in 2025, it's quite a big difference between the two. Is that significant?
No, so again, there's 4 of the 2 tooths, the 15, 16ths. So there's very few of them, and basically there's one dry causes that number to drop quite a lot.
Yeah, so by next year there'll be more.
So it'll be following
The drop off in numbers,
these guys down to.
and drop from 16 to 40, the drop off in numbers.
Okay, so yeah, going this way as well, we have a limited number of sheep that we can have in the whole flock. So to have more high proportion Wiltshires, we drop out the lower proportion ones as we go. So these are kept in as a comparison group, but they drop down to being between 20 to 25 ewes in an age group. So they descend in number over. So it becomes the challenge of having the numbers that we need to tell a story, but also having the numbers that we can afford to run through the project.
Yeah, so at the moment we're using the Romney as the baseline, benchmarking these results. The column that's missing on the right hand side
There's industry.
maybe what Richard is achieving back home with his purebred Wiltshire flock, and or what about Limestone Downs? There are other places that are doing work with Wiltshires as well. I mean, do we have anything else that we could be slipping into the right to say this is where we're heading, or we might head, or we might try to avoid? So.
Well, Richard's here, he can comment on what he's getting out of his stud flock, or he might wish to comment. Yeah, in a different environment and all those things, but yeah.
Well, I think as a breed they are actually quite fierce. Like, well, in a pure breed, if they go too pure and you get inbred, the first things to go are sort of fix some of the mouths, but credit to being a very tight genetic breed, they are actually pretty fertile. So I would have thought they're more limited on what you're putting down their throats than what their fertility is.
Yeah, so what do you stand in your stud?
I stand between 100 and, mixed age year, I use which I took this as part of between 180 and 200.
Yeah, so you're scanning 180, 200. I would argue for most of you, if you're scanning that high, you get too many triplets, so you don't go any higher anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, so the other line that we'll put on this as we start to publish it into scientific literature will be industry. So what is industry achieving in those? Because if you compare that to industry, the Romney flock and the Wiltshire flock are above industry numbers on both those.
What's the total size of the data set for the Wiltshire study?
Just wait for Dean to work when we say a number. It's about 500 a year.
Yes. Yeah, so how many ewes are there in a given year?
About 300 ewes in a given year.
Yeah, so calendar year, we're going for 5 years. And some of those original halves have been pushed out to get more than 7/8 and stuff. So, yeah.
As the higher groups drop out, the 50% and so forth, get whittled down. Obviously, the numbers change year on year.
Yeah.
The biggest driver is the fact that we are breeding at hoggets every year. First cross was easy, they were whopping hoggets. Every year they're getting smaller, aren't they? That sort of shows towards the end here. So, it's keeping them up to, body weight, isn't it? So.
Yeah, so we're choosing to breed hoggets, and a commercial farmer may not wish to do that. We're getting lambs out of hoggets all the time to speed up how quickly, if you wanted to quickly transition to kind of Andrew's point, if you want to quickly go from a Romney or a Drysdales or whatever composite you got to a shear, that can do it in the shortest possible time because of the complexity of it and the shearing costs associated with these animals that are loading shedding and restoring shear. So how you get there quickly.
So I should clarify, roughly 300 Wiltshire ewes and plus the 80
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about 2,000 records. Then if we look at weaning weights, it also tells quite a good story in the other way, which is that there's no real difference between our Romney line and our Wiltshire lines for the weights of lambs weaning, whether they be from the hoggets or from the adult ewes. Came over last week and had the pleasure of helping out with docking. We had a couple of over 30 kilo lambs at docking in the hogget hog. So there's very little percentage difference between those animals, but a little bit extra weight. So you might give up something in fecundity, but you might gain something in the weight of your lamb when you're either weaning it or sending it off to slaughter.
The real thing you see is there's more variation within year than there is between breed, right? Because you have a dry year, poor spring, good spring. And last year was, it was a bit harder. But there's very little between the composites, breed splits. There's more between year.
And then following group of hoggets from 2023, when they weaned, through to when they lambed in 2024, we can see that there was no difference in their weaning weights. They were all comparable, 25 to 26 kilo weaning weights. Hogget mating weights, now only the hoggets that reach 40 kilos go to mating, and you can see that the higher proportion looks, as Digby said, are getting to be slightly smaller at that mating point. Scanning percentage, Romneys are slightly ahead, but they've sort of been selected for longer for hogget mating, so it makes a little bit more sense. Lamb vigour scores, there's nothing in it. There's slightly higher vigour from our lambs from having a bit of Wiltshire in there. Makes them get up and go, and makes Cat, Dean and Jeff have to run across the paddock to catch them.
How do you usually do?
Whether they can catch it.
So a vigour score is basic. Oh, Dean, you do the vigour score. Yeah.
This lamb vigour score is just a 1 to 3. Sorry, a lamb vigour score is just a 1 to 3 score, basically active and struggling and so forth, down to pretty weak.
Yeah, so that's when you're tagging them. So these get tagged twice their lambing beats, so we tag them against their mother, so we do the originally. So when they're tagging, how vigorous the lamb is at 12 to 24 hours of age is a standard technique of the viability of the lamb and the strength of the lamb.
So at set stocking, we can see still very little difference between them at set stocking. At weaning weights, our ewes are again the same weight. So what we're seeing is these animals aren't hugely different the whole way through. Weaning weights of lambs, there's very little in it, so you're not losing anything by doing this process. It's not whether you're going to get an advantage one way or the other from an animal production perspective, it's about losing the wool. That's the part that the farmer's after. If we were standing here and showing you that all of the Wiltshire stuff was really low, you'd have to have a really big benefit from losing wool. But actually this is no loss to your production side, and your benefit comes from not having to shear these sheep later on. So following two tooths, and the same story occurs at two tooths. They're the same weights at all of our scores. Our scannings, I will say that 1.5 has 8 animals in it, and the 1.6 has about 16 animals in it. So there's low animal numbers, which makes comparing reproductive performance really difficult, because you do need somewhere between 50 to 100 animals to start to identify differences between groups.
Which we'll have in a couple of years.
Yep. Lamb vigour scores, still the same, no difference between them. Set stocking weights, they're all looking the same. Docking weights, they're all looking the same. So we are getting the same production out of the animals as we're doing this cross. The benefits coming from them not having wool on them when you come to shearing.
Have you got lamb survival, so from scanning to weaning?
Yes, we do have that data.
Yeah.
And it's a binomial trait, which is live dead, so we won't do that till the end, because you need big numbers. So you need 150 lambs to detect a 5% difference. But at the moment, there's no indication that it's any worse. And in fact, some years on raw numbers, and we don't like to present the raw numbers because people take the numbers the wrong way if there's only 20 sheep, the lamb survival is higher in the Wiltshire process.
Yeah.
But we don't really want to do that until we've got a big enough number in case, because it's such a different trait. So like live weight, it could be 60.1 kilos, 60.2 kilos, rather dead or alive. So you need bigger numbers before you have certainty on that. But at this stage, it looks like they're no worse and technically slightly better based on raw numbers. I wouldn't say that's truly the case yet.
Yeah, I think in commercial crops you're seeing some encouraging gains.
Yeah, well, you'd expect that if they're vigorous at birth, that's a good proxy for survival. That's why that score was developed like 40 years ago by breeders. There is some data from overseas to suggest they have a thicker skin at birth, and that might be something we might try to measure next year. Because if you've seen those lambs, they are shorter wool depth or stubble at birth. So to be able to survive from a thermoregulatory point of view, they must have some other trait. Yeah. And so whether it's thicker skin or not, and therefore by being across, they might get a bit of heterosis in the thickness of the skin and the stubble depth. And so that could improve lamb survival. That's still something that has to be done yet.
Got some hides at home, and yeah, you mentioned the unblemished, potentially, unfortunately hides aren't worth anything, so it's a moot point, but the thickness is actually quite significant.
Yeah, so the thickness of a pelt at 6 months of age is correlated to thickness at birth, so you'd expect that. And we do know the adult pelts are thicker, so you'd expect the birth, but we just want to measure some post to birth just to be firm about that.
There's quite small numbers there for the live weight. So
yeah.
the breeder, what live weight will use?
I do have the antibody condition score. Interesting reading into that though, I think it probably paints a picture that lamb's good. The weakness is probably they're late in maturing, so just getting them to that hogget up, and I'd probably drop mine down to 37 as opposed to in the 40, but then they do grow on as well to probably a high mature weight. I'm about 65 average, I guess.
For your mixed age?
Yeah, for mixed age.
Okay.
Just looking at your 25 docking rates.
Yep.
How shed are those 15, 16?
The lambs?
The lambs at that point.
So
what I'm actually saying is how much wool are they carrying as a comparison to
on this
the
side, so your 100 grams weight difference?
Well, no, it's not just 100 grams. It's going to be more than that in wool that they're carrying, but also, as you've just brought up, they've also got a different, if they've got a thickness in skin.
Yep.
The skin weight won't be much. The lambs don't shed till after Christmas.
Okay, so they're carrying
and
more.
You'll see them out there.
Yeah, so basically you'll see what they look like 2 weeks ago at docking.
Yeah, a few do, but generally.
They'll be killing.
The adults are shedding in spring generally, because you need a daylight effect. And the lambs haven't been through a shorter daylight, they haven't been through a winter yet, so it's not until their next spring that they get the proper cycle generally, when the shedding occurs.
Depends on the breeding and where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I've got lambs that are 3/4 shed now.
Yeah, but most of these
And
composites are quite.
Mine are composites also.
Yeah.
You said the daylight effect, is that proven it's the daylight?
Yeah, so in sheep, the wool follicle cycle is controlled by daylight, or darkness really, melatonin, and so that's what controls the cycle. Because it makes sense, right? The animal needs a trigger to know whether it needs to grow more fleece or less coming in.
Yeah, I think the trigger was getting in the feed.
No. Sorry, if they're better fed, they can be a week or two earlier, but really what controls the cycle is the daylight. So if you feed them all the same throughout the year, indoors or whatever, feed them the same, still get the cycle. But if they're fed a bit better, it can come a bit early. Yeah.
This is just
like puberty, you can push it forward a bit early.
So a couple of weeks ago I was talking with some Australians on their shedding score system, and they actually score wooliness in Australia. So don't go to Australia and buy a 5 on their shedding scale because you get really woolly sheep. You want 0s on the Australian system. We use a 1 to 5 when we're scoring them. The beef and lamb or SIL database uses a 0 to 10 scale. So 0 is no shedding at all, that's a woolly sheep. 10 is completely shed, and we use the same one, but with 5 is fully shed, and we do half scores the whole way through. So you see all of these different ranges out there from completely nude. I'm pretty sure we had some run through last week for docking that were completely shed, but we still had some that were looking like a score 2, and they will go on to become a score 4 later on in the year. So when we looked at the lambs, so this is lambs scored in late January, early February in 2021, 2022, 2023 and 2024. Haven't had a look at the 2025 data yet because we'll pass that on to the students to have a look at. But you can see our first cross, we have a lot of 0s, which actually means that those sheep still have all the wool on. They're still basically, you drag them out and go, did we bring in some romneys instead? But they are the cross. And then we get halves, so they've got most of the bellies clear, ones, clear bellies. But we don't really see anything above the 2. We do the next cross, we shift to having mainly a lot of half scores, so there'll be a clear belly, maybe starting to clear out in the crutch, but they'll go all the way through to 4s. So we're starting to see completely nude or very close to nude lambs on second cross. Third cross, we're still getting our low shedding lambs coming through because the genes are still there to help them keep that wool, but now we're getting all the way out to 5. So these lambs are where we want to select, and what you do as a breeder trying to push yourself through faster, you would breed from the 1s and 1.5s in this range, and then once you get out here, you're not going to make anything under 2.5, and then once you get out to the last score, you're not making anything under 3. So you just start to push yourself through that way. That's going to help you speed up your rate of gain. For some context, these are the 3/4 and 7/8 ewe lambs in December 2023 for their score at shedding. So we've got these ones like here, which were quite early lambs, so they did get a bit more of that daylight effect happening. So they've been in a state where daylight was increasing their entire life, and they're shedding quite a lot, and we've got other ones. They seem to, in the lambs, shed a lot more randomly than the ewes, which sort of go from the belly up around the top. Sort of a graded method. And then when we look at lamb's shedding score and hogget shedding score, so comparing the two together and saying shedding score a lot becomes very difficult. You can see that your lamb score is nicely correlated with your hogget score, which means you can score 1 and you'll be getting the other one later on. We know this is about 70% between the two, so scoring high on lamb, you'll get the same, about 70% relationship to the score in the next year. Going to a 2-tooth score actually is 70% of the 70%. So you're actually going to get about 40% correlation between the two if you lose it each time. It's a little bit unfortunate. But we've had a look at the SNP data we've collected, so we've got about 6,500 animals have been genotyped through this program. We get a heritability around 0.48. Now, if this was a binomial trait, which is just they shed or they don't shed, we wouldn't be able to estimate a heritability, because heritability would either be 1 or 0. You either shed or you don't. But what we're seeing is we get a score of shedding this, and that means that 50% of what we see in their shedding isn't being controlled by their genetics, it's being controlled by other factors in the environment. Which means we're not dealing with one gene, we're dealing with many. Probably somewhere between 15 to 20 genes of interest are involved in this. Jim's job is to calculate heritability on hoggets, but previous estimates are showing that it's similar for these. So as it's a large project and we've been generating data the whole time through, we have got some new members in the team now. So we've got new PhD student and master's students. So we've got Emma, who's sitting at the back, waving her hand. So she's going to look at the meat and carcass quality of the 7/8 and 15/16 romneys. From here we take them back over to Massey and follow them through to slaughter. We have Agana, who is doing a Master of Veterinary Medicine, and they're doing CT scanning of bones to see whether the bone structures are different between the crosses and whether that's leading to any differences in muscularity. So are they laying down muscle in different ways as these crosses occur? We have Brujin here. She's going to look at the genomic data, so 6,500 genotypes. All the shedding scores that we come out here and score, we're going to follow that through and see if we can find the genes that are involved. And then we have Aish. His role is going to be looking at that bioeconomic modelling and finding out what is the price and what's the cost of doing this, what's the benefit of it, and how long it's going to take. We'll add some animal welfare stuff into this project as well, most likely. So we've got some future measurements coming up, so through until the project is slated to end in 2027-ish. We're going to continue to score some feet on 2 tooths, 4 tooths, see whether those feet are holding up as animals age. Looking at the teeth scores, so we actually get a pair of calipers and we measure how tall their teeth are, how many are left, because as they graze further down the pasture they start to lose their teeth. Continue looking at mothering ability. So far there's been no difference in that, but we've still got low numbers at the high proportions, so we have to continue going through. We've got the carcass quality coming, do a bit more pelt quality, looking to do some heat tolerance differences. So Renee, you've seen the audience, has some cool data loggers that we can put on the sheep and in the sheep to track how warm they are, so we can have a look at the differences in temperature between shed and shorn sheep. And then we've also got a thermal imaging camera, so we can actually film the animals and see where they're dissipating heat from and where they're absorbing it, and get an idea of what's happening inside the animal from that perspective. So far our conclusions are we're not affecting live weights. Our sheep weigh the same amount, their lambs weigh the same amount, so we're getting good weaning weights, we're getting good scanning. We've got no meaningful or statistically significant differences in reproductive rates between them. They're starting to look like there's some in there, but we have to get more data to really understand. One thing we did find out is you really shouldn't score your lambs before January, because otherwise they're all going to be zeros. So all of our lambs have been scored in January and February for that purpose. We get an increasing shedding each year, but we get increased variation as well. So we don't necessarily find that they're all 5s on that next cross. We still get zeros coming through on the 15/16, because it's just what cards you get handed when you do your reproduction. And then we're starting to find the regions in the genome that are of interest for the genes that are going to cause this to happen. So outputs, this is the 5th field day we've held. We've got 3 scientific papers out. We've done 5 different presentations out to farmers across the country. Quite a few articles in the farming press. We're doing school visits that come here, either from Wairarapa or West-Keel, and Steve's podcast with Countrywide last year.
Robin, can you flick a few slides back to where your new team is then?
Yep.
Right, so the work that they're doing underway at the moment?
Yep. So Emma,
some of that work results going to be available hopefully this year or early next year. So
Hopefully this year.
Yeah,
do we have to wait until November next year?
No.
To see some of that results, because to me some of that stuff looks really interesting.
So Emma will have to be finished by middle of next year.
Yes, Emma has to finish her masters one next year, and we try to push it out by the rural press. The other 2 PhD students have only started the last few months, so there'll be stuff slowly starting to come out. But yes, we try to push it out, the information as soon as we get it.
The hybrid vigor effect, through statistical analysis, can you separate that out if you had enough data to do that?
Yeah, so as we get more back crosses occurring, we can start to estimate the proportion of genetics from either parent, and then we can start having a look at what's happening. The other really cool thing is, because we've got genomic data, we can actually find the parts of the genome that are coming from the sire and having a look at whether because it's completely possible in a first cross animal, or second cross animal, that it's still the same genetic proportions as the first cross. Because it just happens to inherit all of the Romney bits from the mother and all of the Wiltshire bits from the father. It didn't get any of the Wiltshire bits from the mother, which will keep its heterosis at 100%. So we don't get that drop.
Would it be right to say with the heterosis effect there, and it's kind of matching the Romney at the moment, you kind of expect it to
we expect
decline?
We expect it to drop out. Heterosis is usually greatest in traits like growth rate and milk production. We don't really see a massive amount in reproduction or staying in reproduction.
Yeah.
That generally drops off pretty quick. Ironically, it's the opposite of inbreeding, where the first thing to go in an inbreeding situation is actually reproductive performance. It's sort of something that holds on quite well in heterosis. And then acknowledgements to the funders, which are the LA Alexander Trust, Massey Foundation, the Sydney Canning Riverside Trust. Thanks to Beacon Land and First and Baker Egg for getting some promotion out for this event. Our ram breeder who supplies us our rams.
You're allowed to put my name there.
I just took Steve's one, which is always just said the ram breeder. Farm staff, so Digby, Robin and Grace, basically keep things running when Owen's over here. And then Dean, Kat and Jeff, who actually do the day-to-day, come over here, do the hard work, and put up with us, coming up with interesting ideas of what we should measure next. And then also the advice and suggestions we get from people at these field days, and via email, phone call, just asking us what else we could look at. Yeah, well, thank you.